అన్ని తీసుకుని వెళ్ళిపో. Mm. Good evening, everyone. Guys, am I audible? Yeah, thank you. So, the last session we were discussing with how do you perform static NAT configuration on Cisco ASA, and also how we can write the required security policies so that internet users will be able to access our servers, right? So, not only uh, static NAT, we also have another kind of NAT which can be used for hosting servers, right? Now, why do we need a separate NAT is because here when you speak about static NAT, static NAT, I was saying it is a one-to-one NAT, one private IP address translated using one public IP. So in static NAT, right, uh, if you want to host 10 different servers, if you wanted to host 10 different servers using static NAT, how many public IP addresses do you need? So guys, if you have to host 10 different servers, how many public IP addresses do you need using static NAT? Okay, so none of you seems to be responding. So let me just continue with my session. Okay, so when you speak about static NAT, because it's a one-to-one map, if you have to host 10 different servers, right, you will need 10 public IP addresses for static NAT, right? So you need 10 public IP addresses for static NAT. But let us say if you do not have 10 public IP addresses, right? If you do not have 10 public IP addresses, then it will not work because without 10 public IPs, you cannot go with 10 static NAT configurations. So in such conditions, you will go with port redirection NAT, right? You'll go with port redirection NAT. Okay, so port redirection NAT will be the alternative. So in port redirection NAT, you have many public IPs, you have many, not many public IPs, it's one public IP, translated to many private IPs, right? So you'll have one public IP address translated to many private IP addresses, right? So there is only one public IP that you display to the end user, right? And then based on what service is requested by the end users, right? Internally in your network, the request will be sent to different servers on their private IP addresses. So it will be in this way So what I'll do is I will tell the internet user that there is a public IP address. Right? There is a public IP. Let's say I'll take it as 206.182, 201 dot say 125. So there is a public IP I take, and then I say if there is a request for HTTP service, then send it to 192.168.10.200. If there is a request coming for say RDP, then forward this request to say something like 192.168.10.10. Right. So it's the same public IP that the end user would be accessing. Right. So from internet, end user will be accessing the same public IP, but based on what service the end user has requested, right? Internally, you will be forwarding that request to different private IP addresses. Okay. So is the concept clear? What happens in the private IP? Sorry, in the port redirection NAT? Yeah. Okay, so let us see how we can implement this configuration on the ASA. So go to ASDM. So you'll have to connect using your ASDM login credentials. Okay, so once you log into ASDM, you can go to configuration. In the configuration, as usual, go to the firewall tab, and here we are supposed to create objects for public IP address and also private IP addresses, right? So let us create objects, network object. So here within the objects, we say add a new network object. So first I'll create the public IP address object, and then I'll create the private IP address objects, right? So for public IP, let me just call it as public IP. So I'm not calling it as web private or web public and all, right? Because that will be used for both the RDP server and also the web server. So I'm just calling it as public IP. So let's say 206.182.201.125. So that's a IP we have taken. So I'm creating the object for this public IP 201.125. Say OK, and then create object for these two private IP addresses. So let's say I'll take it as web private 192.168.10.200. That's a web private. So as you see, this is the web page that we will be displaying to the end user. Now for this 10.200 IP address, we have to configure NAT. So we say add automatic address translation rules. And here address translation rule, the NATing type will be given as static NAT itself, right? So there is no separate uh, mention as port redirection NAT. It will be given as static NAT, and then you will have to do the configurations based on the ports, right? So we'll say go with static NAT as a NATing type. Translated IP address will be your 201.125, the public IP object what we have created. Then in the advanced settings, so as usual, even in the static NAT, we were selecting the interfaces, LAN and WAN interface as a source interface and destination interface. Now for port redirection NAT, because we say translation has to be done specific to the port number. So here I'll define the port number. So I say if request is coming for this public IP address for HTTP port, then translate it to the HTTP port on the server. So I'm saying this static NAT, whatever I have defined, that is for 201.182.201.125 to be translated to 10.200. This translation should only be for port number 80, right? So they should only be for port number 80. Say okay, apply, and then create another object for the private IP. So let us call it as RDP private. The IP address 192.168.10.10. As usual, we also have to define NAT. Same static NAT would be the NATing type. And we are trying to do the translation using the same 201.125 IP address. In the advanced settings, source interface as LAN, that's where our server is present. Destination interface is WAN, that's where you are going to receive the request from internet, right? And then for the ports, we say 3389 as a source and the mapped port. So we say if request is coming to port number 3389 for the public IP, accept it and send it to 10.10. There's a private IP address of your RDP server on port number 3389. Say okay and apply. Now if you see in the NAT, you have this rules created, right, for the um, port redirection NAT, right? So automatically these rules are added. So you don't have to manually create the rules. And as usual, any policy, not only in the filter rules, even in the NAT, any rule that is created specifically for something will be on the top, and the more generic policy will be on the bottom, right? So these two rules which are created specifically for port redirection, we are taking them onto the top, and the one which is more generic, the port address translation policy, the one which is more generic, we are taking it to the bottom, right? Say apply. And now in the access rules, we have to give the security policy, right? We'll have to define the security policy. So let us add a new policy on the WAN interface because we are receiving traffic from internet, right? So we'll have to write this policy on the WAN interface. So source will be anyone. So any user on internet trying to reach our web server for HTTP service should be permitted. And in the same way, anyone trying to reach our RDP server for port 3389 should be permitted. So 3389 is our remote desktop protocol. Okay. So we are permitting incoming traffic and apply. So once it is done, to verify this port redirection NAT, let us try to access our web server and also our RDP server from external machine. So I'll first check with the web server. Let us say 206 got updated. 206.182.201.125. So this is our web server, right? Now for the same IP 201.125, I'll also try to take remote desktop. So earlier in static net, it was like two different IP addresses, right? You'll need two different public IPs, but here you don't need two different public IPs. One public IP can be used and you can access both the individual servers, right? So as you see, I'm also able to take remote desktop of that system. Okay, so the internet user will only see one public IP address, right? But based on what service is requested by the internet user, your firewall will accept and forward that request to different servers in the LAN network. It will be sending it to different servers in the local network. Is it clear how you are trying to do this configuration? Okay, so these are all like different kind of configurations what you can do on a Cisco ASA device. Then there is one another concept called VPNs or virtual private network. So this VPN we will discuss after we are done with Storm Shield. So we'll also discuss the Storm Shield UTM and then we will configure VPN between ASA and Storm Shield. Right? Because trying to configure VPN on two devices of the same brand, you'll not really have any kind of complications, you'll not have any kind of challenges and all. But when you try to do configuration between two different brands, then you'll have some challenges, right? So we'll also discuss what all things we have to take care of because say tomorrow once you start configuring VPNs, maybe your client does not have a Cisco, or maybe you are working with some product XYZ and your client has some other product, right? So in such condition, you should know like what all parameters you'll have to take care of so that your VPNs will be uh, established properly and all, right? So that we'll discuss after we go with the Storm Shield. And now give me 2 minutes. Let me shut down this ASA firewall and then we'll go with the Storm Shield. So I'll just have to shut down the ASA and then start the Storm Shield device. So because we'll be using the same IP addresses for both firewalls, right? So I cannot have both running together. You'll have a conflict. So let me just shut down the ASA1. So here when we speak about the security devices, so far we have discussed about stateful inspection firewall, but a stateful inspection firewall is a very old technology, right? And that's not suitable for our today's network environments, right? So in today's network environment, we are not using a stateful inspection firewall, but we are using a different technology, which is much better and which is advanced than a stateful inspection firewall. So what we use today based on our network is either a UTM product or a next generation firewall. So we'll see what is a UTM and then we'll see what is a next generation firewall. So UTM stands for Unified Threat Management. UTM means Unified Threat Management. Now this UTM has stateful inspection firewall. So it has the stateful inspection firewall. It has intrusion prevention system, VPNs, that is the virtual private network. And then it also has advanced user authentications. It has built-in URL filtering. It also has built-in anti-malware inspection. It has built-in anti-spam inspections. It has application control. It also has bandwidth control. So you can define how much bandwidth should be given to each segment of the network or maybe to each server in your network, right? So you also have that. You also have internal logging and reporting, right? You have some additional features like say geolocation based security policies, IP reputation based policies, right? So all these are some features that you have in a unified threat management, in a UTM, right? So UTM has all these features, right? Now you are going to use this UTM into your corporate network where you have a mix of user computers and also servers, right? So where you have a mix of user computers and also servers, you are going to use this UTM or a unified threat management. Right? Now, when you only have a data center where you have only servers, right? So when you have data centers and only the servers, then in that condition, you go with a device or a solution which has only the three features: stateful inspection firewall, IPS, and VPN. You call that as next generation firewall. So this is better than a firewall, but not as good as a UTM device, right? But that is only useful if you are uh, protecting your servers, right? And if you do not have any of the LAN network users and all. So only in a data center where you only have servers, you will be using this. In a corporate network where you have servers and also the users and all, then you'll go with a UTM device. Okay. So is it clear? What is a newer generation security solution and what all features do we get in it? Okay, so here when we speak about this Storm Shield, Storm Shield is a UTM device. So this is a UTM device. So it has all the features that I have discussed now. Right. This is also available as a hardware and a software. So whether you want a hardware device or you want to deploy it onto your virtual networks and all, right? You have both hardware and the software modules available, right? Features and all, you'll have the same set of features, right? The only difference is, are you getting a physical box or are you going to deploy it onto your VMware or maybe your AWS or Amazon or something, right? So we'll see how exactly we configure this Storm Shield UTM. And here there is no application like ASDM, right? So to work with the Storm Shield device, you're going to use a web browser. Right? You're going to use a web browser to do all the configurations. No application like ASDM and all, right? So by default, when you are deploying a Storm Shield UTM, right, you will not have any kind of IP address and all if it is a software version, right? So I'll show you how you can set up the basic IP address for your Storm Shield when you're deploying it. And then we will see how do we connect and start doing the configurations. So here, as you see, uh, when you are deploying the Storm Shield UTM for the first time, right, on a virtual environment, the first thing it will ask you is to select your keyboard language, right? Your language for the console and all, right? So here I'm selecting the language as English US. So I go with option number as 7. Then it will ask you to give a password. So there is a default user account called admin. There's a default user account admin. And for this user account admin, it is asking you to configure a password, right? So I'll configure the password as say admin at the rate 123. Confirm the password. So once the password is given, now it is asking you like, do you want to configure your outside interface? So out interface is nothing but the WAN interface. So I say, yes, I want to configure it. And here I give the IP address 206.182.201.122. So that's the same IP address we have used in our topology. And then subnet mask 255, 255, 255, 248. And the default gateway, which is our router 206.182.201.121. So I'm giving the IP address of the WAN interface, the subnet mask, and also the default gateway. And then it is asking you like, do you want to configure the inside interface? That is a LAN interface also. I say, yes, I want to configure it. Now the IP address is 192.168.10.1. That's a LAN IP address. Subnet mask 255, 255, 255.0. So once you give the IP address, it is now asking you like, do you want to configure your firewall from the outside interface? Generally, we don't need configurations to be done from the WAN interface. We'll be doing it from the local network itself. So I say, no, I don't want to do it from the WAN interface. So finally, what all configuration you have defined, that is IP address, subnet mask, default gateway and all, right? Everything has been updated. So now you don't need this console, right? You don't need the console. You can directly go to your client mission. So from the client mission, you will start doing the configurations through the web browser. So let me just clear all the cache and everything. So to connect, you say HTTPS, the firewall LAN IP, which is 192.168.10.1/admin. Say HTTPS, the firewall IP address /admin. Say OK. So you can accept the certificate warning. That's because you have a self-signed certificate from the firewall. So this is how now you have the login page. So I'm giving the username admin. Password we have configured is admin@123. So you can log in. So I'm giving the username and the password. So once you log in, this is how you are going to see the firewall interface. Right? This is how you are going to see the interface. So here it shows you how many NIC cards do you have, right? So there are two NIC cards on this firewall as of now. It is showing you that both are connected. And the second NIC card, it has a small shield kind of icon. So it says that this is your LAN interface, and the other one without the shield, this is like the WAN interface, your outside interface, right? It is showing you the difference between the inside and the outside interface. And then it tells you what is a firewall model. So this is EVA1. This is the firewall model, and gives you with what is the serial number of your firewall. So you can also see the name and the serial number. So as of now, you have not configured any host name. So it takes the serial number itself as a host name. Then it tells you how much RAM is available. So it says there is 2 GB of RAM on this firewall, right? So maximum is 2 GB for this particular model, and 2 GB of RAM is there. What is the firewall software version, right? So it is giving you with that details. How long your firewall has been up and running. So it is also giving you that information, right? Now for you to do the configuration, you go to the configuration tab, right? You'll go to the configuration tab, and here the first thing to be done is under configuration, we go to the system configurations. Right? We go to system configurations. So here you can see what is the firewall name, what is the language, right? So this is a language what we have selected at the deployment time as English US, right? So it is showing us the language, and then it is also telling you what is the firewall date and time along with the time zone. So here you can see it is showing me the correct date and time, but the time zone is not correct. So we will change the time zone. So you say Kolkata is the time zone. So you select the time zone and say apply the configuration, right? So when you change the time zone and say apply the configuration, it will ask you to reboot, right? So the firewall will restart once you change the time zone, because your logging and all the modules are dependent on the time zone itself, right? So once your date and time or the time zone changes, all those modules have to be restarted. Right? So this is how once you deploy the Storm Shield UTM, right? And with the deployment itself, we are going to define the IP address on the LAN and WAN interface, the default gateway, right? So after you connect, you'll have to set the proper time zone for your firewall. Okay, so this is how you start with the basic configuration. So is that clear? Okay, so here what I did was I'm having two VMs of the same Storm Shield, right? Because when you go with a normal stateful inspection firewall, you don't really need any kind of updates and all. But when you go with the UTM device, you will require updates, right? So without updates, you will not be able to properly work with the UTM devices. So what I did, I have a different copy of Storm Shield, which already has all the updates and all, right? So once I have shown you with this initial configuration on how to set up the IP address and all this, right? So I'll just shut down that VM. Initial configuration, you don't really need internet access, but once you are done with the initial configuration, then as I said, your UTM needs updates and all, right? So for that you will require internet. And anyway, our firewall or UTM is the gateway between our private network and internet, so should not be an issue. Internet is anyway connected to the UTM device. Is that clear, Mr. Bright? For deploying the UTM, same as how you are launching all the other VMs which I have given you, right? You will have this .vmx file, right? Which you'll have to double click and it will automatically start from VMware Workstation. Same as what you did for Windows VMs and all, right? Same thing will be applicable for your ASA and also Storm Shield. Is that clear, Harish? No, they are not configured. Those VMs are not configured. You are doing the configuration now. Mr. Bright, when you say issue with the VM, if you tell me what is the issue, I can tell you. So without telling me what is the issue, I'll not be able to help you guys. And when you say you have some issue with the VM, right? If it is about installing the VMware and all itself, right? So that's beyond my control. So you'll have to see what's the problem with your system, right? So now you are a cybersecurity admin. So you'll have to see the basics of installing the software and all. So that you'll have to see what is the error and you will have to troubleshoot. If you're getting some issue with the VM, I can help you. Okay, so once you do the configuration, right? Once you are defining your date and time and all, right? Then you can start with the actual configuration of the NAT and filter policies, right? So to configure NAT and filter rules under configuration, you have to come to security policies. Under configuration, you'll have to come to security policies. So in the security policies, you will see an option called filter NAT, right? You will see an option called filter NAT. So in the filter NAT, In Storm Shield, you see some unique feature where you will be able to maintain 10 different kind of configurations, right? But you'll only be able to activate one configuration, right? So you can maintain 10 different kind of configurations. So based on the requirement, you can activate any of the configuration that you wish, right? So what I'll do is, instead of making any changes to the default policies which are already there, I'll take up a empty slot. So here, as you see, I'll take up, say, slot number 5. So there are no NAT or filter rules, right? So I can just name it. Let me say, I'll give a name as a CSP policy. So as of now, there are no NAT rules or no filter rules. So now if I have to permit my LAN user to access internet, I need to first perform NAT, right? I'll have to first perform NAT, and then I'll have to perform filter rules, or I have to write the security policies. So that's what we will do now. We will first configure NAT, and then we will try to configure security policies. Okay, so go to NAT. So what kind of NAT do we need to define? So if you have to permit LAN computers to reach internet, what kind of NAT should we configure? No, don't go with dynamic NAT. If you remember, we were discussing that dynamic NAT is only uh, as a concept, but you will not really be able to use it on a live environment. And speaking of dynamic NAT, except Cisco, no other vendor supports it, because that's anyway not useful for a live environment, right? So Cisco is the only one who is still giving you the dynamic NAT. Others, they are not giving you the dynamic NAT option itself. So what we use is PAT, port address translation. Right? So to define PAT under NAT, we say new dynamic rule with port address translation. So enable the, select the policy. Now you will see you have a new policy created, and the default status is off. So the policy is added, but it is not active. So double click on the status, activate the policy. So the policy should be activated first. And then you have to choose the source and the destination of the original packet. What should be the source? What is the destination? And after translation, what should be the IP address? So when I'm trying to configure static NAT, port address translation, or PAT, what will be the source? What will be the source? So in PAT or port address translation, source will be our LAN network, right? So in the source, when you take your mouse pointer there onto the source, you will see this small edit button. Click on it, right? And you can just say 192.168.10.0, and you see there is an object called network in. So there is an object which is already there in the firewall, right? So there's a network which is present on the in interface, right? So once it is given, say okay. Destination network will always be any, because we are not sure uh, what exactly the end user might try to connect. So destination will be any. And what should be the translated source IP? So for request with 192.168.10.0 as a source, right, a private IP, what should be the translated IP address after NAT? So after NAT, our translated IP address should be the firewall's public IP, right? So here in the translated traffic, I'll say the source will be our firewall's WAN IP, which is 201.122, which is firewall out. So now I'm saying if traffic is initiated from network in trying to reach anything on internet, then those requests have to be translated using firewall out. Okay. So there is the same configuration we have done in the ASA firewall also, right? And the same thing we are also defining here in the Storm Shield. Is it clear? So after we configure NAT, in ASA we were able to access internet directly, right? That's because in ASA you are having a option called security level, right? So you are saying higher security level to lower security level, traffic will be accepted by default. But here in case of Storm Shield or any other devices, you don't have this security level concept, right? So you have to write a policy permitting the traffic. So I go to filtering rules and here I will write a new policy, new simple rule. So by default, the policy is off. Double click to enable the policy. So the default policy says action to be taken is block from any source to any destination. So here what I will do is I'll say action to be taken is pass, permit the traffic. And at the same time, I'm also saying create logs. So I'm also saying create logs so that whatever traffic that is passing through your firewall, a log will be created, right? So traffic has to be permitted and log has to be generated. And then I say, if traffic is initiated from source 192.168.10.0 to anything on internet. So traffic initiated from LAN network trying to reach anything on internet has to be permitted. Say apply, activate the policy. So once you have done this, you should now be able to access internet. So as you see, you are now able to access internet. So HTTP and HTTPS we are able to access. Let us also check FTP and SMTP. So I'm trying to telnet ftp.hp.com. So port number 21. So FTP is working, right? So I'm able to connect to the FTP. Let me also check SMTP. So I'm trying to reach port number 25 of the server. So as you see, I'm also able to reach the server. Okay. So LAN users are able to access all services on internet, right? But as we have already discussed in ASA, do we permit all services to the LAN network users? We don't do that, right? will be very specific about what all services will be permitted to the LAN users. So let us do that configuration here. So I'll say for this LAN network computers, don't permit all services. I'll be very specific. I'll say I only want, so instead of any services, I'll delete this and I say I only want HTTP, HTTPS, and say SMTP service. Okay, so I only want HTTP, HTTPS, and SMTP services to be permitted. I don't want to permit all services. So when you're permitting only some specific set of services, we should also permit DNS. We have seen this earlier. If DNS is not permitted, we will not be able to access the other services. So let us write a separate policy for the DNS. So I'll just make a copy of that policy, and instead of all the other services, I'll say permit DNS. So now I have two policies here. One policy is permitting traffic from LAN network, right? Is permitting traffic from LAN network to internet only for DNS resolutions. The second policy is permitting traffic from LAN network to internet, but only for few services like HTTP, HTTPS, and SMTP. And then I'll write another policy at the end which says traffic that is not matching with the above two rules, traffic that is not matching the above two policies have to be blocked and log messages have to be created. Right. So now you will know what kind of traffic is accepted by the firewall and what kind of traffic is denied, right? So whether traffic is permitted or traffic is blocked, you will have a log message. So you will have a record of what is happening with the firewall, what is accepted and what is rejected. Okay, so is it clear how we start writing these policies? So you just have to write the policy and apply that, right? So once you click on apply, then your policy will be active on the configurations, right? So now if I check FTP from my LAN computer, FTP will not be permitted because in our policy we did not say anything about FTP, right? So we are only saying HTTP, HTTPS, and SMTP should be permitted. We did not say anything about FTP, so FTP will not be allowed. Okay, so as you see, it's not allowing FTP access. Now, in the same fashion, like what we did in ASA, if you want to give full permission to a specific IP address, you can also do that. Say, I'll write a policy where I want traffic to be permitted, right? Traffic to be permitted if it is generated from 192.168.10.45 IP. So I'll say create a new object here because 10.45 will not have any object by default. So we'll create a new object. So let us call it as say manager IP. The IP address 192.168.10.45. So now I am saying if requests are initiated from 10.45, for any services it has to be permitted. So no restrictions with what services are allowed or what services are not allowed. And if you see, these are the same set of policies that we have written for ASA firewall also, right? So it is all the same set of policies, but the difference is how exactly you are doing it, right? The way your user interface is looking, that's the main difference. Concept wise, logic wise, what you are writing there in ASA and what you are writing here in the Storm Shield, they are both same, right? And let me also show you something else. Now here, this last policy which says traffic has to be blocked, right? If I take this policy above, now see, immediately there is a error message which says this particular rule number 4. What does rule number 4 say? Traffic initiated from LAN network to reach HTTP, HTTPS and SMTP. It says this rule number 4 will never be applied as it is covered by rule number 3. So this one says this rule number 4 will never be applied because rule number 3 is already covering it. Now what does rule number 3 say? Traffic initiated from any source to any destination for any service, it has to be blocked. Right. So when firewall starts inspecting a incoming packet, right? Once the firewall is checking rule number 3, irrespective of what is the source, what is the destination, and what is the service requested, will every packet match this rule number 3? So what do you say? So every packet, whether you are trying to reach internet or you are trying to check your emails or whatever is the activity, whatever you are trying to do, will all that match rule number 3? Say from the LAN computer you are trying to reach SMTP, or from the LAN computer you are trying to reach HTTP, you are trying to reach SSH, whatever your request is, will it match with rule number 3? So everyone see what is rule number 3. It doesn't match. See the policy again. So let's say, for example, 192.168.10.10 is trying to reach SMTP server. 192.168.10.10 is trying to reach SMTP. Will that traffic or will that request match rule number 3? So if you are trying to reach SMTP from 192.168.10.10, that will match rule number 3. See, rule number 3 says source anyone, destination anything, destination service anything. So whoever is the source, be it your LAN computer or be it something on internet, destination anything, destination service is also any, be it HTTP, FTP, SSH, SMTP, whatever it is, right? So every request is matching rule number 3, right? And what is the action in rule number 3? It says block, right? So rule number 3 says whatever traffic it is, it has to be blocked, it has to be denied, right? So if that policy is applied, all the traffic, all the traffic that is initiated from your LAN computers will match with rule number 3. And if it matches with rule number 3, will the firewall apply rule number 4 for any traffic? Will rule number 4 be inspected at all? So rule number 4 will never be applied. Firewall will never check rule number 4. Right. So that's what it says. Your rule number 3 is covering rule number 4. So logically, what policies you have written are not correct. Right. So this feature you are not having in Cisco. Right. So ASA will not tell you that the policies what you have written are correct or wrong. It will blindly accept whatever policy you take, right? If it is logically correct, it will apply the policy. If not, it will not apply the policy. But it will not tell you whether it is correct or wrong. But here, you will be able to immediately see whether the policy that you have configured, logically, is it correct or not. If it is not correct, it gives you an error message. Why it is not accepted? If it is correct, no issue. Right. So if it is correct, no error messages. Is it clear? Now, let's say I want our LAN computers to access internet at a very specific time period, right? So I don't want them to access internet all the time. I want them to be accessing internet at a very specific time. All I need to do is go to this action. So where I'm permitting traffic from my LAN network to internet, I'll just go to the action, and here I have an option called scheduling, right? I have an option called scheduling. So in the scheduling part, I'll just create a new object, a new time object will be created. So let me say, I'll just call it as a net time, and I'll say internet should be permitted from say 21 hour 8 minutes to 21 hour 30 minutes. So I'm just defining the time. Say okay, apply these changes and activate. So apply the changes and activate it. So now if I want to reach internet, firewall will not permit me because the timing is not correct. It's not matching with the security policy. Okay, so we'll not be able to access that web page because the time is not matching. And once the timing matches, right? So once the time given in your security policy and the time on your firewall is matching, then automatically you will be able to access internet, right? The same as what we were doing in the ASA, right? So based on the given time, firewall will automatically allow or deny access to internet. So is it clear how you can write policies based on the timing? So not only this, uh, as I said, you also have built-in URL filtering, right? You'll also be able to do that. You can also uh, define what websites will be permitted and what websites will not be permitted, right? And for this, you don't have to install any third-party application and all. The feature is built in into the UTM itself, right? So all you need to do is in the security policy, right? So before this security policy part, you have this URL filtering, right? So below the security policy, you have URL filtering, right? So in the URL filtering, you just need to write the policies. So what all what all URL categories to be blocked, you just have to define it, right? Now let's say I don't want online shopping websites to be permitted. Okay, I don't want shopping category and say the online social network category websites to be permitted, right? I'm just saying shopping category and social network category should not be permitted. So earlier, if you remember in the ASA firewall, we are specifically defining each and every URL, right? We are defining each and every URL very specifically, right? But now we don't have to define the specific URL. We don't have to say www.ebay has to be blocked or www.amazon has to be blocked and all, right? So you can directly say so and so category has to be blocked. So automatically all the websites that fall under that specific category will be blocked, right? So now once the URL filter has been defined, you can now go back to your security policies, and in the security policies you can see there is something called security inspection. So in the security inspection you can define this URL filter. So just double click on the security inspection, you have the URL filter part. So from the drop down menu, choose the URL filter. So we have done the configuration on URL filter 00. So I'm defining that. Okay, so once it is done, now let me say I want to access www.ebay.com. As you see, it says ebay.com is blocked under online shopping category. Right? I'm trying to reach eBay and it says eBay is blocked under online shopping category. So I don't have to manually define each and every website. Right? So I can just say block this category of websites. So all those websites which come into that category will be blocked. Right? So this is an advantage in this UTM. So you don't have to go with a third party URL filter server and do the integrations and all. Right? So the URL filtering part is built in into your uh, UTM itself. Is it clear? Now you are trying to permit end users to access internet at some specific time period. Right. Now let's say if I visit this page, okay. So here I have an option to download a virus file. Right. Now we'll see what happens when I click on it. As you can see, I am able to download the virus. Now assume in the same way, when you permit end user to access internet, they visit a website and unknowingly they download a virus, right? Unknowingly they download a virus and execute it. Will their computer be compromised? So if a user downloads a virus and executes it on their system, will their system be compromised or not? So their system will be compromised, right? Any kind of malware, not only a virus, it can be a ransomware, it can be a backdoor, anything. So to give an additional layer of security, right? To give an additional layer of security, what you can do is along with the URL filter, you can also enable antivirus inspection on the UTM. You can also enable the antivirus inspection on the UTM. So once you enable antivirus inspection, now whatever file that's being downloaded by the end user, your UTM will verify that file, and if it is found to be a malware, it will automatically stop you from downloading it. It will not let you download this malware or the infected file. Okay, so is it clear how URL filtering and antivirus inspections work on a UTM? Okay, so these options were not available in the stateful inspection firewall, right? So these options, you will not be able to see them in stateful inspection, right? But you have those features in the UTM device. So can we say having a UTM in our network will give us with much better security compared to only having a firewall? Yeah. And here, uh, sometimes organizations will also have different kind of requirements which are not addressed by URL filters. Now, say for example, uh, my organization says any of my computer, be it a LAN computer or be it a server, should not be connecting to a server or should not be connecting to any resource that is hosted in China. Right. So there is a requirement in my network which says any of my LAN computer should not be connecting to any server or any system that is in China. Right. So here there's nothing to do with whether it is a shopping website or whether it is a social media website or a gambling website or anything. Whatever resource it is, it can be a web server, it can be a email server, it can be an FTP, anything, right? If it is hosted in a particular geographic region, it should not be permitted. Access to that particular server or access to that particular resource should not be permitted. right? So here, let us implement that policy. So what I do is I say, by adding a new security policy, I'll say traffic initiated from my LAN network, traffic initiated from my LAN network to a destination, right? So in the destination, I'm not going to specify a IP address or something, but I say to a destination which is in China should be blocked. So source any of my LAN computer trying to access something in China has to be blocked for whatever service it is. Apply and say activate the policy. So once it is done, now let's say I'll try to access a web page, eastday.com. So I know that there is some website which is hosted in China. So I'm just trying to access that. As you see, this particular policy is blocking me from accessing that server, right? So let me just disable the policy and apply this. I'll just try to access the server again. Okay, so as you see, once we disable that policy, right, where we are denying our LAN computers from accessing resources in China, once the policy is disabled, now I'm able to access the web page. So when that policy was enabled, right, we were not able to access the page, right? So not only the URL filtering, right? So not only blocking resources based on the category, you will also be able to write policies based on the geographic location. So you can say any of my LAN computer should not be able to access a resource in so and so country or in so and so region. Is it clear? So these are all like the additional set of features that you get with a UTM, right? So these all features you will not be able to implement using a stateful inspection firewall. So only through UTM you'll be getting all this kind of features. Okay, so we still have a few more things like implementing application level controls, implementing user authentications and all, right? So we'll see all those in the next session. Is it clear? Okay, so in the next session, we'll see with user authentications and few more configurations, right? And then we will discuss about the VPN part. Okay, so with this, I'll end the session for today. Thank you all.